For years, people thought I had lost my mind. I was sitting on over $100 billion in cash, not invested, not deployed, just sitting there in treasury bills, in short-term instruments, earning a modest return while the stock market was climbing and everyone around me was urging me to do something with it. The headlines were not kind. Buffett is out of touch. Berkshire is missing the rally. The Oracle of Omaha has finally run out of ideas. I read every one of those headlines, and I did not change a thing. Because I was not holding cash out of confusion. I was not holding cash out of fear. I was holding cash because I could not find what I was looking for. And I have learned over 60 years that buying the wrong thing at the wrong price is far more dangerous than holding cash and waiting. Today I want to explain exactly why I kept that cash, what I was looking for, what I was not willing to settle for, and what this approach has taught me about the single most underrated skill in all of investing. Because the answer is not really about cash at all. It is about patience and discipline and the courage to do nothing when doing nothing is the right thing to do. Let me start by challenging something most investors believe deeply. Most investors think cash is a problem, a drag, a wasted opportunity. They have been told by financial media, by advisors, by the culture of markets, that money sitting idle is money being lost, that the goal is to always be fully invested, that holding cash means you are missing out. I do not believe this. I never have. Cash is not a sign of confusion. Cash is not laziness. Cash, in the right context, is the most strategic tool an investor has. Here is why. When markets are rational, when prices reflect genuine value, being fully invested makes sense. You own wonderful businesses at fair prices, and time does the work. But markets are not always rational. There are periods, sometimes long periods, when prices across the board are stretched, when the things worth owning are priced at levels that do not offer adequate return for the risk involved. When patience is not just a virtue, it is the only intelligent response. In those periods, holding cash is not a mistake. It is a position, a deliberate, considered position that says, I have not found what I am looking for yet, and I am not willing to overpay simply because I feel pressure to act. Charlie Munger, my partner of over 50 years, used to say, it is not supposed to be easy. Anyone who finds it easy is stupid. Holding significant cash in a rising market is not easy. Every day, you watch prices go up. Every week, someone tells you what you are missing. Every month, the headlines remind you of the returns you did not capture. And you hold anyway, because you know something the headlines do not always acknowledge. The return you get when you eventually buy is determined almost entirely by the price you pay. And you are not willing to pay the wrong price. Let me tell you what I have always been looking for when I deploy capital. It is not the most exciting business. It is not the fastest growing sector. It is not whatever is on the cover of financial magazines this month. I am looking for three things, and I have been looking for the same three things for 60 years. First, a wonderful business. By wonderful, I mean a business with durable competitive advantages, something that protects it from competition over long periods of time. I have called these moats, economic moats that make it difficult or impossible for competitors to take away the business's customers, its pricing power, or its profitability. Coca-Cola has a moat. The brand is so deeply embedded in global culture that no competitor can simply decide to take its market share. American Express has a moat. The prestige and trust attached to that brand creates a loyalty that is extremely difficult to replicate. I look for businesses like these, not businesses that are merely good today, but businesses that are likely to still be wonderful in 10, 20, 30 years. Second, Honest and capable management. A wonderful business run by poor management will eventually disappoint. I have seen it happen. The moat gets neglected. Capital gets allocated poorly. Short-term thinking replaces long-term discipline. I want to own businesses run by people I would trust with my own money. People who think like owners. People who treat shareholders as partners, not as an audience to be managed. Third, a fair price. This is where patience comes in, because wonderful businesses run by honest management are not always available at fair prices. Sometimes they are priced as if everything will go perfectly forever. And at those prices, even a wonderful business can be a poor investment. I would rather pay a fair price for a wonderful business than a wonderful price for a fair business. But I would also rather hold cash than pay an unfair price for anything, no matter how much pressure I feel to deploy it. The cash I held was not idle. It was waiting, patiently, purposefully, for the moment when all three of those things align. There is a particular kind of courage that investors almost never talk about. It is not the courage to buy when everyone is selling. That gets discussed often enough. It is the courage to do nothing when everyone expects you to act. In the investing world, activity is often mistaken for intelligence. A fund manager who is constantly trading, constantly buying and selling, adjusting positions, responding to news, appears busy, appears engaged, appears to be earning their fees. But in my experience, most of that activity destroys value rather than creating it. Every unnecessary transaction has a cost. Every decision made under pressure rather than clarity carries risk. And the investor who is always acting is almost never thinking as clearly as the one who is waiting patiently for the right moment. I once said that the stock market is designed to transfer money from the active to the patient. I meant it then. I mean it now. When I was holding $100 billion in cash, I was not inactive. I was reading. I was studying businesses. I was watching prices. I was thinking carefully about what the world would look like in 10 and 20 years and which businesses would be the most valuable part of it. What I was not doing was forcing decisions. What I was not doing was settling. What I was not doing was paying prices I could not justify simply because the money was sitting there and people expected me to use it. Benjamin Graham, the man who taught me more about investing than anyone, had a concept he called Mr. Market. Mr. Market comes to your door every day with a price. Sometimes the price is attractive. Most of the time it is not. And the critical discipline, the one that separates successful investors from unsuccessful ones, is the ability to say no to Mr. Market on the days when his price is not right. Saying no to $100 billion worth of opportunities over several years is not easy, but it is sometimes exactly the right thing to do. Let me address the critics directly, because I think their arguments are worth taking seriously and worth refuting clearly. The most common criticism was this: while you sit on cash, inflation is eating it. You are losing purchasing power. The cash itself is a bad investment. This argument has merit in the abstract. Inflation does erode purchasing power. Cash held indefinitely is not a sound long-term strategy. But this criticism misses the point entirely. I was not holding cash as a long-term strategy. I was holding cash as a temporary position, a placeholder, while I waited for opportunities that met my criteria. The question was never cash versus inflation. The question was cash versus overpaying for assets. And here is what the critics consistently underestimate: the cost of buying the wrong thing at the wrong price. If I had deployed that $100 billion into assets priced at levels I considered too high, and those assets subsequently corrected significantly, the losses would have dwarfed any inflation drag on the cash. The critics were comparing cash to a rising market. The fair comparison is cash to a market that eventually corrects, which markets historically always do. The second criticism was, you are no longer nimble enough to find good opportunities. The market has changed. Your methods are outdated. I have heard versions of this criticism at every stage of my career. During the dot-com boom, during the financial engineering era, during the cryptocurrency surge. And every time, not always immediately, not always on a convenient schedule, the fundamental principles reasserted themselves. Good businesses at fair prices outperformed speculative assets at inflated prices. Patience outperformed activity. Discipline outperformed enthusiasm. The principles do not become outdated. Only the assets change. The framework for evaluating them does not. Now let me talk about what all that patience is actually for. Because the whole point of holding cash, the entire discipline of waiting, is to be ready when the moment arrives, when prices fall, when fear drives good businesses to unreasonable discounts, when Mr. Market comes to the door in a panic and offers something genuinely valuable at a genuinely attractive price. In those moments, cash is not a drag. Cash is ammunition. I have deployed capital most aggressively during the moments of greatest fear. In 2008, when the financial system seemed on the verge of collapse, I had the cash to invest $5 billion in Goldman Sachs on terms that were extraordinarily favorable. Terms I could only obtain because I had the cash ready and the confidence to act when others were paralyzed. In 2020, when the pandemic sent markets into a brief but violent freefall, investors with cash were the ones who could buy while others were selling in panic. In both cases, the investors who had been fully invested going into the crisis had no ammunition. They could not buy at the bottom because they had nothing left to buy with. They could only watch, hold on, and hope. The investor with cash, patient, disciplined, sometimes ridiculed for missing the rally, was the one who could act decisively when decisiveness had the highest possible reward. This is the hidden return on cash. It does not show up in any quarterly statement. It cannot be measured during the waiting period. But when the moment arrives, when fear creates opportunity, that cash becomes the most powerful asset in the portfolio. Now, what does any of this mean for someone who is not managing $100 billion? More than you might think. The principles scale down exactly as well as they scale up, because the psychological challenges are identical regardless of the amount involved. The pressure to act when everyone around you is invested. That pressure exists whether you have $1,000 or $100 billion. The temptation to chase performance, to buy what has already gone up, to feel that sitting in cash means you are missing something important. Those feelings do not care about the size of your portfolio. Here is how I would apply this thinking on a smaller scale. First, never invest money you will need in the next 1 to 3 years. That money belongs in cash or near cash instruments, regardless of what the market is doing. Investing it subjects you to the worst possible outcome, being forced to sell at exactly the wrong moment because you need the funds. Second, maintain a reserve beyond your emergency fund. A small amount of dry powder, money you are ready and willing to invest when the right opportunity appears. Not a prediction that a crash is coming, just a recognition that opportunities appear unexpectedly, and having cash ready is what allows you to take advantage of them. Third, never let the pressure to be fully invested override your judgment about price. If you cannot find anything worth buying at current prices, it is perfectly rational to wait. The market will not always be at current prices. And the patience to wait for better ones is a genuine edge, one that most investors throw away because the waiting feels uncomfortable. And fourth, remember that doing nothing is sometimes the most sophisticated thing you can do. In a world that rewards activity and punishes stillness, the investor who can wait genuinely, patiently, without anxiety, has an advantage that no amount of research or analysis can replicate. I held that cash for years, through the criticism, through the headlines, through the questions at every shareholder meeting about when I was going to put it to work. And I held it because I understood something that the critics did not. The return you earn on an investment is determined the moment you buy it, by the price you pay relative to the value you receive. Everything after that is simply waiting for the market to recognize what you already knew. If the price is not right, waiting is not a failure. Waiting is the strategy. The greatest investors I have ever studied, and I have studied many, share one characteristic above all others: not brilliance, not access, not special information, patience. The patience to hold cash when others are fully invested. The patience to wait for prices that make sense. The patience to sit with discomfort while the market does things they cannot control and did not predict. And then, when the moment arrives, the decisiveness to act. If today's video gave you a different way of thinking about cash and patience, please subscribe to this channel. Every week, I share one clear idea about money, grounded in 60 years of watching what works and what does not. Leave a comment and tell me, has there ever been a moment when doing nothing was the hardest financial decision you made? I want to know. And I read every single one. Cash is not the enemy. Impatience is.